الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. I hope everyone is doing well, inshallah. We will continue with the hadith session that we had. And this week we will be talking about a concept that comes up in many different ways in multiple ahadith of ours, and that is the concept of foresight. Before delving into that, I want to take a moment for us to remember our brothers and sisters in Iraq. Many of us heard what happened today in the suicide bombing, or the two suicide bombings that took place. We pray for our brothers and sisters. It's very unfortunate to hear what has happened, and for those who've seen some of the scenes or some of the clips, you can see how devastating and how really frightening the whole incident is. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He rids the Muslim ummah of these individuals who do these types of things, ruin families, take away providers of families. And it's really painful to watch what happens to our brothers and sisters with these types of attacks. This is part of the reason why some of our maraja like Ayatollah Sistani have orphanages that take care of orphans in Iraq in particular, is because of this. Because every time a blast like this happens, it's not just the individuals who are involved in this blast who lose their lives, but then many families who lose their providers, many families who lose those who are providing for their day-to-day needs. And so our duty is that if we are able to help those, the orphanages that we have under Ayatollah Sistani's supervision. It's under Al-Ain Foundation, and they do have an office here in Texas as well. So something to think about, that if I'm able to, that I can donate, inshallah, to this cause and help our brothers and sisters who are going through this difficult time. As it relates to the topic that we wanted to discuss tonight, like I said, the topic we're going to be discussing is the topic of foresight. Foresight, and in Arabic they refer to it as al-hazm. Hazm meaning foresight in the sense of a person who has the wisdom, he has the insight to be able to predict where something is leading towards. He's able to see how things are going to turn out at the end of a process, right? And the more we explain it, the more you'll realize how much of a practical skill it is and how important it is to have this in our day-to-day lives. There are those who will engage in different activities without planning things out, without understanding where things are going to lead. They can't see the end. They just engage in the activity and just see how things go. They move on with their life, but without keeping in mind what's going to happen at the end. And then there are those that from the very beginning, depending on the steps that they're taking, depending on how they're approaching every situation, they can picture and they can see what the final status is going to be, what the goal is, how things are going to end up at the end of the day. And because they have that insight, they can plan properly. Because they have that insight, they make the right decisions right now. And the more and then beyond that, important skill for the human being to have, as we will discuss, you will find that this belief that we have, this iman that we have, the faith that we have, the things that Quran and Hadith ask us to do, the sacrifices that Quran and Hadith ask us to make in this world. It's praying, it's fasting, it's depriving yourself of a pleasure that maybe others indulge in. All of this really falls under the concept of foresight. It all comes into the picture when a person has foresight. If he doesn't have foresight, he's not going to be successful in this arena. if he can't see where his life is headed, if he can't see the final destination, then he's not going to be willing to sacrifice for it. He's not going to be willing to do the right things right now. But if he sees the final goal, if he can see how things are going to turn out from right now, then this person is going to be willing to make the proper sacrifices right now. The same way an athlete who doesn't see the goal in his mind, doesn't remind himself of that final status that he wants to reach, he's not going to be willing to make the sacrifices. Being an athlete, for example, is not an easy thing. You have to sacrifice a lot of different things, a lot of things that normally people would, won't even understand. You have to eat right, and you have to wake up early, and you have to do this workout and that workout. Only an athlete is willing to do that if he has the final goal in mind, if he has the foresight to see where these activities, where these sacrifices are going to lead him towards. But if he doesn't have that in mind, he's not going to be willing to make those sacrifices. And similarly, when it comes to us, we are not going to be willing to make those sacrifices if we don't constantly have our final destination in mind. If we're not constantly thinking of where things are leading towards, what is the final goal? If the human being forgets about that, then that's going to be the beginning of him perishing, the beginning of him, losing his chance on being successful on life. So this is what the Quran and Hadith are going to talk to us about. Al-Hazm, foresight, having the ability to see where you're headed, having the insight to see, if I do things this way, what's going to happen at the end of all of this. Okay, this is so important from an Islamic perspective. It plays such a key role in the belief system of a believer, in the actions of a believer, that when individuals used to come to the Prophet and they used to ask for advice, and this is a very common thing, the Prophet, of course, it's not like he had classes, it's not like it was done in a formal way where people would come in the morning, they would attend classes and then they would walk away. It's not like that. Many times the Prophet was walking around in the city of Medina, he was taking care of his affairs, he was in the masjid, for example. People would come and ask questions. It was later on during the time of the Ahlul Bayt where things started to become more formal. There were then, things that we call seminaries or universities started to form within the Muslim world. But during the time of the Prophet, this was not a common thing. In Medina, things were simple from this perspective. The Prophet was there. If you had a question, you would approach him. It wasn't so much that he had a class with students sitting there. Yes, he would sit in circles with his companions. We have that. But more so it was coming from the people. People had questions. So this man comes to the Prophet and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I need a wasiyah from you. Wasiyah not in the sense of a will, but a piece of advice. What is it that you want to tell me as your advice? If you wanted to give me some good advice, what would you tell me? And the Prophet, he said something before he gave him his advice. He said, Hal anta mustawsin? He said, you're really asking for advice? In other words, you're really going to take it to heart? What I tell you to do? Are you going to actually act upon it? Or you're just asking. A lot of times people ask for advice. They just want to see what you say. They don't really care about actually making it happen, yes? They just want to see, let's just see what, this person thinks or that person thinks. So the Prophet says, Hal anta mustawsin? Are you really going to take my advice to heart? Are you going to act upon my advice? And he said, yes. And the Prophet repeated this and said it 3 times in total. 3 times he said, you're gonna act upon what I'm about to tell you? He said, yes. Qala na'am. He said, yes, I'll definitely do it. Then the Prophet told him this. He said, this is a very simple piece of advice. He said, from now on, فَإِنِّي أُوصِيكَ, I am advising you. إِذَا أَنْتَ هَمَمْتَ بِأَمْرٍ فَتَدَبَّرْ عَاقِبَتَهُ. Whenever you want to do something, and it sounds like a very simple piece of advice, but it's the very core and the very foundation of what a believer does. He said, إِذَا أَنْتَ هَمَمْتَ بِأَمْرٍ, whenever you decide to do something, فَتَدَبَّرْ عَاقِبَتَهُ, think of where it's going to lead. It's easy to look at an activity, it's easy to look at a situation right now. What's difficult is to see what the result is going to be. What's the result going to be in a year? What's the result going to be in 5 years? Okay, this is what the Prophet is saying. He says, think about what the aqibah, what the fate of this deed is going to be. What is it going to lead to? فَإِن يَكُنْ رُشْدًا فَامْضِهِ. If you feel like the return on this deed that you're doing is going to be a good one, famdihi, go ahead with it. وَإِن يَكُ غَيًّا, but if you think it's going to create problems for yourself, فَانْتَهِ عَنْهُ, then stay away from it. This is the piece of advice that the Prophet gave to him after 3 times telling him, هَلْ أَنْتَ مُسْتَوْصٍ, are you going to take my advice to heart? So this shows that this is a very core piece of information when it comes to how a believer is supposed to approach different situations. Now, there are different layers to this concept of foresight, different layers to this concept of insight as it relates to how things are going to turn out to be, what my actions today are going to lead to. At a basic level, there's one understanding we have of this concept. Then at a deeper level, Quran and Hadith give us a different understanding of the same concept. In other words, you apply the same concept to different situations, you'll be dealing with 2 different dynamics. There is the foresight that all of the people of this world understand. And that is, in this world, in this life, when you want to make a decision, this decision, you have to think about it. You have to contemplate it. The more important the decision is, the more thought you have to put into it. You have to see, what is it going to lead to? How is my life going to look like 5 years from now if I make this decision right now? Yes? This is one level. Then Quran and Hadith teach us also that the one who truly has foresight, the one who truly sees his final destination, is not only looking at how things will change in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. This person is looking at the akhirah because that's what he sees as his final destination. Depending on the knowledge of the human being, the worldview of the human being, if he sees this world as his final destination, then yes, he's going to always be thinking about how things will affect him 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 2 years from now. But then the one who has a deeper worldview, he has a brighter, horizon in front of him, he sees his future as the next world. So though he might ask these questions about 5 years from now and 10 years from now, his most important question is, how is this going to affect me in my final abode? How is this going to affect me in my final residence? How is this going to affect me where I finally settle down? In this life, we say, okay, after you turn 30, 35, 40, now you started a family, now you settle down. Quran says, if you want to settle down in this world, technically you never really settle down. This place it's not Darul Qarar. It's not a place of tranquility. You never really settle down in this world. Why? Because there's always problems. There's always concerns. There's always things that make you anxious. There's always worries. Yes? There's always things you have to deal with. Quran says if you want to talk about a place where you go and you, quote unquote, settle down, that's the next world. لَهُمْ دَارُ السَّلَامِ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. They go to a world where it's a place of peace. Yes? That's the place where it is Darul Qarar. Qarar meaning something that is mustaqir. It is settled down. There's no movement in the sense that this person can now reside here. In this world, you never really settle down. Yes, we have this picture of when I retire, things will settle down. Yes, in certain aspects of your life, you settle down. In other aspects of your life, there's still things you have to deal with. Now you retire. Now maybe your health becomes an issue. Your children become an issue. There's always things in this life. This life is never a place of full residence and full, peace and tranquility. It's not built to be that way. Quran says you will settle down somewhere else. So the one who has true foresight, he is looking at how this will affect his final residence. Where is his final residence? His house of retirement? No, that's his final residence in one sense. But in the deeper sense of the word, he's looking at his akhirah. So this foresight has 2 different areas where you apply it, in this world and in the next world. And both of them are important for a believer. Both of them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has emphasized that a believer has foresight as it relates to his dunya and his akhirah. He has foresight when it comes to both of them. Okay. This is why the hadith of the Ma'sumin, and in particular Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, his ahadith are many when it comes to foresight as it relates to the understanding what the result of your deeds are going to be in this world. So the hadith says, and this is the benefit of foresight. When you have foresight, when you pay attention to what things are going to lead to, what happens? The benefit of it is that it stops you from regretting things. Regret is such a serious problem in our lives, yes? You do things and then you regret them later. Why? It's only because you didn't have foresight. That's why you end up regretting things. Otherwise, if I had the proper foresight, if I knew what this was going to lead to, and I contemplated it, and I understood it, and I acknowledged it, then this will save me from regretting the things that I do, because I can see what it's going to lead to. If it's a problem, I'm not gonna come close to it. Yes? This is why the hadith of Amirul Mu'mineen says, he says, وَثَمَرَةُ الْحَزْمَ السَّلَامَةِ. He says the benefit and the fruit and the result of having foresight, as-salama. You end up being okay at the end of the day because you are already predicting what's going to happen. You're already keeping an eye on all of the threats and all the dangers that are going to come your way. And in another hadith, he says very beautifully, he says, at-tadbiru qabla al-amal. He says, thinking and contemplating about what you're going to do before you actually engage in it, yu'minuka min an-nadam. It protects you. It gives you immunity from what? Min an-nadam, from regrets. Because if I thought about it very well, and I consulted those that I have to consult, and then I do it, then more often than not, I'm going to end up, with the right results. I'm going to end up with the proper results in my hands. Now you might say, well, sometimes you do things, you thought it was the right idea, but then it turns out that it wasn't. You did everything right, and you really took all the steps, you thought about it, you consulted others, and then, you do it, and it doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to turn out. Well, if that's what happens, then you can know that this was a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you did everything properly, you took all the steps necessary, you did the proper thinking, not a rush decision, no, proper thinking. If you didn't allow your emotions make the decision for you, you made the decision yourself. Yes? If you consulted those who in your mind could have possibly given you pieces of information that are important for this decision. If you took all the proper steps and you made that decision and still the results did not add up, they didn't turn out the way you wanted them to turn out, then this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you can put this on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You say, Ya Allah, I took all the proper steps, but it didn't lead to what I wanted to lead to. Instead of making my life easier, it made my life difficult. You can put this on Him. Why? Because you did everything in your power. You took all the steps. But the one who doesn't take the right steps, then he ends up with regrets. Why? Because he can't put it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he didn't plan things properly, if he didn't consult the people he has to consult, if he didn't think about it enough, and if he let his emotions make the decision for him, after things go wrong, can he come back and say, Ya Allah, this is what you wanted for me? No, this person cannot say this. Why? Because he didn't do his duty. And this is how you can tell at times if this is something that you can put on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or you cannot put on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I make a decision with no foresight at all and things go wrong, can I say, well, inshallah khair, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted me to go through this? No, this was a lack of, preparation from you. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes for you to learn from your mistake now, but what happened, I can't put it on Him. But if I took all the proper steps, then yes, I can put it on Him. I say, Ya Allah, I'm going to be patient with this situation because I did everything properly. And at the end of the day, I don't have full knowledge, but because I took the proper steps, if anything goes wrong, this is on you. And now I can be patient because now I know that this is something you wanted for me. This is when you say, Insha'Allah khair. This is when you say, this is something you decided for me. When you did everything you could do, and the rest of it was in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it didn't turn out well, that's when you can put it on Him. Yes? But only when you do the proper thinking and contemplation. This is why the hadith of the Imam says, he says, at-tadbiru qabla al-amal. Thinking about it, contemplating it, before you engage in it. That is what yu'minuka min an-nadam. But if you don't do that, then no, you can't sit there and put this on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can still learn from your mistake next time you take the proper steps, but you can't sit there and say, well, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted for me. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to take the proper steps when you were making this decision. Where does this come up, for example? A prime example of this is a marriage. A prime example of it is when two people are going to come together. And sometimes you will see, and this is not what Islam preaches and teaches us, sometimes you will see that individuals, they will push these two individuals to get married immediately. Yes, it's okay. Inshallah, everything will be fine. No, there are steps. They have to have time to discuss things. What is your plan for life? What is my plan for life? How do you, picture your life in the future? What do you expect of your husband? What do I expect of my wife, for example? And so on and so forth. It's important for them to have these discussions. Marriage is a big decision. You're not going to make that in a rushed manner. You're not going to make that purely based off of emotions. Yes, marriage, once you are married, then emotions will play a very big role, a very key role, of course. Yes, the affection between these two individuals will have a very key role to play. That's where they compromise for one another. But when they are deciding if they want to enter into this, emotions cannot be the first and foremost reason in order for these people to get involved with one another, to marry one another. No, you have to take your time. It's a big decision. You have to take your time. And yes, after you have given it enough thought and you have consulted those that you needed to consult, and now you feel like you've done everything, then yes, you also don't want to be engaged for 20 years. Like what we see in this society nowadays, where people are engaged, and of course when they say engaged, it doesn't mean married or anything like that. No, it just means, we've told each other that we're gonna be together. And after a while, they said, well, we're living together anyway, so what's the point? What's the point of a marriage anyways? What's the point of calling ourselves engaged? Yes? We'll just live together and no marriage, that's not a problem. You hear many times celebrities, other individuals, this is the direction in which this society is moving towards, by the way. And if we don't do a good job of instilling an Islamic culture in our children, dare I say, a couple generations from now, this is what our children, our grandchildren will be doing at that point. Because this is the direction that society is going in. Unless I can teach my children otherwise, they're going to look at society. That's what happens with every human being. Yes? And that's why what we do is so important and it's so critical. So you have to take your time with this decision, and at the same time, once you reach a point where you can make your decision, then the rest of it, you do tawakkul. This is a long discussion, but I'm going to be cutting it short, of course, because, our Thursday night programs are not meant to be a full lecture. But, so I'll be moving on, but I'll just say this. When you want to decide something, most people think that when they're at 80%, they feel like 80% sure about the situation, 90% sure about the situation. They feel like their mind is telling them that this is a good move, it's a good idea, it's a good decision. Some people think that 5 or 10% of doubt that is remaining, you have to do istikhara to take care of that 5 or 10% of doubt. That's not how istikhara works. That 5 or 10%, that's where tawakkul is used, not istikhara. Istikhara, yes, when you're 50-50 and you can't figure it out, that's where istikhara comes into play. But when my mind 80-90% is telling me this is the way to go, and I say, well, I have 5% doubt, I have 10% doubt, so I should do istikhara in this situation. No, that's where you do tawakkul. Ya Allah, I've taken all the steps that I could have taken. Now at this point, I'm going to rely on you. Because there's no decision ever that you can make and be 100% sure about it. No decision at all. There's no decision you can ever make. You're going to get into your car tomorrow. Is there anyone to guarantee you that you'll never have an accident when you get in your car? No, there's always a 2% chance of that, 3% chance of that. If you use your phone while you're driving, much more percentage of that, much higher percentage of that. No one can guarantee anything for you. Yes? So then you say, okay, well, I have 2 or 3% of doubt, so then I have to do istikhara for it. No, that's not how it works. When you reach a point in your decision where you feel confident about it, then you go ahead with it. The 5 or 10% doubt is always there. There's no decision you make that doesn't have that percentage of doubt. That's where you use tawakkul. That's where you rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not where you use istikhara. Istikhara is not for those situations. Istikhara is for a situation where the doubt, it has a much, much stronger, firmer grip of your situation. That's where istikhara comes into play. So the human being, he has to have foresight when it comes to the decisions that he makes in this world. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, in the case of a marriage, you have to think, this is the person I'm going to live with for 30 years. Do I really want to make a judgment, a call, or this decision based off of the wealth that this person has, based off of the looks that this person has? Or do I have to go and look after the proper criteria? Yes? Financials are important. Attractiveness is important. These are all things that are important in marriage. Yes, to a certain extent, they all play a role. Yes, but are they the primary, the one and only thing that you have to be looking after? Of course not. There's other elements as well. Akhlaq being, probably the most important one of them. So we have to take time when it comes to these big decisions. Then the human being and the believer, he also has the same foresight when it comes to the akhirah. And of course, that's another session. Inshallah, we'll leave that for next week. How the human being has to keep in mind, if I give the decision for who I am going to live the rest of my life with this much thought and contemplation, if I give the decision of which stock I'm going to invest in, hours and hours of contemplation, if I give this much importance and thought and contemplation to what type of a decision I'm going to make for my career, which school I'm going to attend, which courses I'm going to take, which job offer I'm going to take, how much thought and contemplation should I be giving to my akhirah? How much thought and contemplation should I be giving to those decisions that are going to affect me beyond the 50, 60, 100, 120 years that I'll be alive in this world? That requires a lot more thought and contemplation. If I sit for hours and hours and I think to myself, what am I going to do with my career? Shouldn't I be thinking, at least not for hours, at least for minutes? What am I going to do for my akhirah? What am I going to do with these flaws that I have? What am I going to do for my spirituality? These require attention as well. Because if you have foresight for something that's going to affect you for a couple of years, shouldn't you have foresight for something that's going to affect you for eternity? This is something we have to think about. So this is something we will leave inshallah for next week, the ahadith and how they speak about the foresight that the human being has for the next world. And I'll just put this hint here. This is part of the reason why we have so many ahadith that say, if you think for a little bit, it has this much reward and this much reward. It ties into this concept here. Let's move on to the ahkam portion of tonight, and these are important ahkam that we are covering. We were discussing the situations where someone has to pray qasr or they have to pray full. Praying qasr, meaning that they pray 2 rakats. Praying full, meaning that they pray the 4 rakats. We talked about a person who travels. We talked about the conditions, how far you have to travel. What if you don't know how long you have traveled, the city limits, when you start calculating the distance. We already discussed all of that. The next points that we're going to be covering are these. What are those times that even though I am traveling, I still have to pray a full prayer? There are 4 situations where, even though I'm traveling, from a fiqhi perspective, from a jurisprudential perspective, you are not considered a traveler, meaning that you continue to pray full. And this is going to apply as well when it comes to fasting, because 90% of the time, 99% of the time, when you're praying full is when you can fast. And 99% of the time when you're praying qasr, that means you cannot fast. Okay? So the first situation, there are 4 situations. Number 1 is where you stay somewhere for 10 days. Number 2 is where you are a frequent traveler. You travel very often. Number 3 is where a person does not even have a residence. We won't spend too much time on that because that doesn't apply to us too much. And number 4 is a person who travels for haram. We already discussed that. We'll touch on it later as well. But the one that we're going to start discussing this week, partially, and the rest of it we'll leave for next week, is the 10-day stay. Right? When I stay somewhere for 10 days. Okay. When I stay somewhere in one place for 10 days, then even though I'm traveling, technically it's a trip I'm on, while I'm there for those 10 days, I am going to pray full. Okay. The first question that comes up here is this. When we talk about a 10-day stay, does this apply if I'm staying for 10 days in multiple cities, cities that might be close to each other, or is it only one city that this 10-day stay applies to? The answer to this question is only one city. So if I go to an area, let's say someone comes to Texas, they're traveling, but he says, you know what, I'm going to be in Texas for 20 days. Where are you going to be? 5 days in Dallas, 5 days Austin, 5 days Houston. This person is going to pray qasr the whole time. He's not going to pray full. Because when they say you stay somewhere for 10 days, it means you stay in the same place for 10 days. Otherwise, I'm going from one city to another city, then that's not considered the 10-day stay. This is important. A lot of times we might go back home. We might stay in multiple cities. We might have relatives in multiple areas. How long are you going back home? How long is your trip? A month. But how long are you staying in each city? Less than 10 days. You pray qasr the whole time that you are there. Okay, so that's the first question that we have to answer. Number one. Number two, how do I calculate the 10 days? If I'm going to go there, is it 240 hours literally that I have to calculate? Or is it somewhere else or somehow else that I have to calculate these 10 days? The answer to this question is that if you get there before Fajr, on the 10th day, you can leave by Maghrib, and still your prayer will be full. If you think about it, that's not going to be a full 240 hours. It's going to be a little less than 240 hours. It might be 230 hours, for example. But if you got there after Fajr, then yes, you would calculate 10 days, which means 240 hours. If you're staying even an hour less than that, then you would pray qasr. Okay, that's the second question. Third question, if I go to a city, I'm going to stay 10 days, but I'm going to make some small trips here or there. I'm not going to go to other cities, but we're going to go to the outskirts of the city. Maybe we go to a city and then we have a friend who lives in the outskirts of the city. Small trips outside, but it's less than, the 20-something miles that we talked about. So it's not a separate trip. It's a mini trip. It doesn't even hit the 20-something mile, threshold that we talk about. Does this apply for the 10-day stay? There are some details here, and I'll summarize it. If it's a short trip that is less than 1/3 of the day, then yes, you can pray full. But if it takes more than 1/3 of the day, right, you stay from the morning till night, then this is not going to count as a 10-day stay. You are not going to be able to pray full in that area. You're going to pray qasr in that area or in that city. Even though it's not 20-something miles away, but because it's a short trip and you're leaving the city, if it takes a full day, then you will not be praying full in that scenario. And the final question that we will answer is this. These 10 days, for those of us who might be in situations where some of these 10 days, salat is not wajib upon me. When I'm calculating the 10 days, if 4 days of these 10 days, 6 days of these 10 days, salat is not wajib upon me, do I count that as part of the 10 days or not? And the answer is yes. You would still count it as part of your 10 days. Next week, we're going to talk about the different situations where you go somewhere, you don't know if you're going to stay 10 days. What are you supposed to do in that situation? Or, for example, you go somewhere, your intention is, I'm going to stay 10 days, and then you stay for 2 days. You don't like the weather there. You say, I'm going to move. I'm not going to stay here for 10 days. What do you do in that situation? And other situations of doubt as it relates to the 10-day period where you stay somewhere and you pray full, inshallah. So we'll leave that for next week. I'm just going to check real quick to see if we have any questions. If someone did something for his kids and thinks that will be better for them for their future without knowing that the kids feels a lot of pressure and that action push them away from Islam. Well, if his intentions were good, then, his intentions were good. But now that he's realized that what he's doing is wrong, he has to change course, of course. But, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at intentions, and that's how he would consider things. Is that considering the Prophet's hadith that you were discussed earlier? Yes. So this person, he had a lack of foresight, right? Or, at the very least, there's a good chance he had a lack of foresight. He didn't think about how this is going to affect his children. So he should be thinking about what the result of this deed of his is going to be before actually engaging in this deed. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is kind enough, even if I had, very good intentions and I do something and later on I figure out what I did, it didn't help this person, maybe even it made their life difficult, well then I would apologize to that person, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still might reward this person. While I have to apologize, the reward might still be there, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at intentions. There's times where this happens. You might think you're doing someone a favor, and then you say something, you do something, and really deep down you really wanted the best for this person. And then as it turns out, what you said in fact is hurtful. What you said in fact is the opposite of what this person wanted, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still rewards you for your intentions. Your intentions were good. But yes, because you hurt this person or because you did something you weren't supposed to do, you apologize and you change course. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Him being Arhamur Rahimeen, He still rewards you because you had the right intentions. Of course, moving forward, you would change things now that you know better. With that, inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. Let's take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of our marhumin and marhumat with a loud salawat. Ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. We do have, before I end, there is a request from a sister who is asking us to do dua for her. The father's name is Muhammad Reza Jawad. And yes, a sister who is in the ICU for the last 2 weeks from our community. So let's take a moment and pray Amma Yujib 5 times, inshallah, for this sister and others who are going through difficulty and are in distress. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 Let's also recite Surah Fatiha for all of our marhumin and marhumat with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.